Okay, we are now presenting you with the May 10th, 2018 edition of Prehistory: A Traveler's Guide. I am your host, Greg Neneman, and on the panel today, I am bringing on a new co-host, Aditya Sarnath. Say hello to our audience, Aditya.
Hello, everyone.
And we're welcoming back Mike Fredericks from the Prehistoric Times magazine. Say hello, Mikey.
Hello, Mikey.
And as for our special guest of honor today, I'm going to be very proud to introduce our highest profile paleoartist to date from the National Museum of Natural Sciences in Madrid, an artist who is renowned for his myriad reconstructions of prehistoric mammals ranging from elephants, mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, Panthera, and everything else in between. Please give it up for Mr. Mauricio Anton. Welcome to the show, Mr. Anton.
Yay.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be with you here.
Oh, it's been one of my dream goals to have you on the program, and now I get to have you for today. So my first question I'll start off with is the simple one. Tell us about your early life growing up in Spain, and what got you interested in doing paleo art, and specifically what got you on doing mammals instead of, like, say, dinosaurs or other groups of animals?
Yeah, well, I grew up in north central Spain. I was born in Bilbao in the Basque country, but when I was just 1 year old, my family moved to Valladolid. And so when I was something like 7, 8 years old, I got this golden book encyclopedia of natural science, a version translated into Spanish. And there I saw several illustrations by American paleoart master Rudolf Salinger. And the one that most impressed me was a depiction of Rancho La Brea scene, with a saber-toothed cat attacking a Colombian mammoth trapped in the tar pit. So I think that made such a deep impression in me that I felt that that's what I wanted to do when I grew up, if possible. There were also very, very beautiful dinosaur paintings by Salinger in that publication. But that mammoth and saber-tooth scene really transfixed me. So I'm still, in a way, digesting that early impression.
That is very, very interesting. And would you like to also delve into your teenage years spent in Caracas in the 70s?
Yeah. There is a Natural Sciences Museum in Caracas, and it only has one fossil skeleton assembled there, and it is a composite specimen of Smilodon from Rancho La Brea, which was donated by the American government at some point. So, now the animal that I had seen painted by Rudolf Salinger was there, not in flesh, but at least in bone, right in front of me. So I would go to the museum whenever I had a chance and sketch the skull, the skeleton, for hours, just trying to understand the osteology. But my first attempts at reconstructing the animal were really not very successful. But still, it was great fun.
Yep, all artists have to start off like this. Their earliest works may not be very impressive, but with enough practice and study, they eventually become more successful and better with time. And I've noticed that with your work. I mean, anything you do, from a basic, pencil study to an amazing oil painting, that took time, that took study to, get that good.
Sorry. Can you repeat the question? I got lost at some point.
Oh, I was just making a statement about how artwork, every artist, starts off, maybe not so great initially, but given enough time, then they just become second nature, more or less.
Yeah, well, I back in those days when I was a teenager, I wished I could possibly become a paleoartist, but looking around me, so it was not a possibility. So I got my training in fine arts, and I had a teacher who insisted very much on life sketching. So I went through that discipline, and I think those hundreds, thousands of hours, drawing a human model, trying to work very fast and to get realistic results, that is what made it second nature for me, to really to get my pencil to become like a part of myself. So that allowed me to get into my real paleoart vocation years later, with reasonably good technical tools.
Very, very cool here. Okay, for the second part, my second question is, if you've mentioned this, I apologize, but this is something I'd like to get more in depth. At what point in your life did you settle on painting or drawing prehistoric mammals versus dinosaurs, and what is it about mammals, be it prehistoric or modern, that has drawn you to do reconstructions of them and to specialize in them over doing, like, say, dinosaurs or other animal groups?
Well, I think there's a mixture of personal preference and circumstance, because for me it was very special to see those reconstructions by Salinger of saber-toothed cat and mammoth, because the animals were definitely different, almost fantastical, but still they were similar enough to modern animals to get like that sort of fringe sensation of being in front of something that is almost there. But then on the other hand, when I started my professional career as a paleoartist here in Spain, most of the fossil sites that were yielding good fossils in this country were fossil mammal sites, were mostly of Miocene age. And so at that time, if I wanted to work for a museum here in Spain, it would be mammals that I would be reconstructing. So that in a way took me in that direction. And many years later, there has been a whole lot of good dinosaur fossil sites being discovered here in Spain. But by that time, I had already become, specialized. So I look at all these dinosaur discoveries with a lot of interest, but I let others do the reconstructions.
As I'm about to say, there's more than enough people doing dinosaurs, but as you mentioned, at that time, there were just so few people just doing mammals.
Yeah, absolutely. I was, and I still am, a great admirer of American paleoartist Jay Maternes, because he almost single-handedly he made like a massive resurrection of fossil mammals in those Smithsonian Natural History Museum murals. That was like such a work of genius, both artistically and scientifically. So for me, that was the brightest star in the world of paleo mammal art. And he is in his 80s, and I think he's still active. So that's such a good thing to have him.
And like you, Mauricio, he does a lot of hominids too, humans as well.
Yes, yes, absolutely, and I think his method is still the best. I was very glad a few years ago when he made the reconstruction of Ardipithecus, because that was such a different and very difficult to reconstruct hominid, because it was so early and so intermediate in many features that I wouldn't trust any other artist to create a reliable reconstruction. And so that was the case with paleontologist Tim White, who from the start had it very clear that Maternes would have to do the Ardipithecus reconstruction.
Could I ask a two-part question while I'm thinking about it? Because you said some things that made me think of this. One was, I never knew that you lived in South America. How did you end up in South America and then back in Spain from your, I guess it was your teen years, right? And that's where you started art?
Yeah, well, my family moved to Venezuela when I was 9 years old. And that was because my father used to work as a jeweler. And back in the early 1970s, there was a big crisis in Spain, so we almost had no middle class. So it was the worst time to be a jeweler in Spain. So we moved to Venezuela, where with the oil prices and everything, there was a really thriving middle class, and so we spent 14 years there until we moved back to Spain, and that was a good timing because then I met some paleontologists here, and I could finally become a paleoartist, which in Venezuela was not practical.
I see, and you were also talking about saber-tooth. Smilodon fatalis. Have you ever, I know you've traveled all over the world, so I'm sure you're going to say yes, but I hope you've been to our La Brea tar pits here in California at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I was there a couple of times, and back in 2013, I was shown the fossil site by the then curator at the museum, John Harris, at the Page Museum. Yeah, and it was so overwhelming. It's I think it's beyond description, and I think it's one of the two pillars now of saber-tooth lore in the world, because I think the only fossil site that can be compared with Rancho La Brea in terms of the amount of saber-tooth cat fossils is, by a happy coincidence, here near Madrid. It's a Miocene site called Cerro Batallones, and it complements what we learned from Rancho La Brea, because this site in Madrid is much older. So combining the two fossil sites, it's like you can see the beginning and the end of the evolution of phyllid saber-tooth cats, true saber-tooth cats.
I'll let someone else ask you a question, but I did want to ask you a question about Batallones too, so we'll talk about that later.
Okay, I think I'll let Aditya have a chance of some of his questions here.
Yep, you should.
Oh yeah, let me just pull them up in one quick sec. Oh yeah, what would probably be your most memorable prehistoric carnivore reconstruction?
Well, I think that the possibility of working with, well, there are many memorable reconstructions, but I remember going to the National Museums of Kenya in Nairobi, and being able to make the first ever reconstruction of a new genus and new species of saber-tooth cat that was described by Swedish paleontologist Lars Werdelin So I had that opportunity to see all those bones of associated articulated skeleton of a species that was completely new to science. And then it was very special because they had a very good comparative anatomy collection. So I had complete skeletons of leopards and lions in front of me to make all the relevant comparisons. So it was really a very, very satisfactory, a great paleoart adventure, I would say.
Wow, that's amazing. But what you talked about regarding the new species of saber-toothed cat that you saw, that kind of reminds me of the new species that was found recently, I believe, in Chad. I forgot the name exactly.
Oh, this, Amphimachairodus cavir, maybe? No. You are talking about a small saber-tooth.
Yeah, the lynx-sized one.
The lynx-sized one. Yeah. That's very interesting because this is an unusual group of saber-tooths, and one that poses its own challenges for reconstruction. So it is what we call the mitylurines. So they are, some people call them false saber-tooths, which I think is an offense because they are absolutely true. There's nothing false about them. But the fact is that they have very moderate saber-tooth adaptations. So when you look at the skull or the dentition of these animals, there are a few diagnostic characters that tell you very clearly that they are on the saber-tooth side of the cat family. But if you saw them in the flesh, it's not only a lynx-sized animal, it was probably a lynx-like animal, because it had, we know from other better preserved relatives of these new species, that these animals had long legs, they were agile, and they had especially long hind limbs, which is something that you see in modern day lynxes. So it's an animal that it's a saber-tooth, but if you saw it in front of you, if you saw the living animal, unless it would take a yawn in front of you, you wouldn't know it was a saber-tooth.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because along with that one, there's like 3 other different species of saber-toothed cats that are in the area. So I found that kind of funny. Yeah.
There are 2 schools always in I think in paleontology in general and in among saber-tooth specialists in particular, which are the lumpers and the splitters. So how do you how do you make sense of the diversity of morphologies in a fossil site or in a general area? And so my dear friend Alan Turner, he was of the lumper type, so he would always resist like naming too many species. But I have to say, with time, I am more and more convinced that there were probably a lot of species around, and probably even living nearby, but not at the very, very same time. And they, their remains can get mixed in a fossil site. So indeed, it's I think that creates a sort of puzzle and a very complicated picture. But I think one very important thing about saber-tooths is their diversity. There were many, many species of saber-tooths in the past.
Yeah, and they're all different shapes and sizes. It it was pretty amazing actually how they mirrored modern felids.
Yeah, and you know, the key, one of the keys for their real differences is one that we are unlikely to ever know, and it is their external appearance. I mean, we can be pretty safe reconstructing, you know, their general proportions, how robust, how muscular some of them were. But when it comes to the skin, the fur, the color patterns, that's so speculative. And when you look at the skeletons of a modern tiger and a modern lion, if you find them in a fossil site, you would be scratching your head, like trying to tell them apart very clearly. But if you see a living lion and a living tiger, there is no possible confusion. So that's a very frustrating part of being a paleoartist, that you have the freedom to create all those fancy spot or stripe patterns, but you really don't know.
Yeah.
I say thanks to you, Mauricio, we do know what their external look like.
Well,
Yeah.
we can imagine. I mean, I'm still crossing my fingers that within my lifetime, some Homotherium or even a Smilodon may appear, you know, frozen in the Arctic permafrost or in some mountain glacier.
Wouldn't that be something?
That would be a sight.
I mean, we did find those cave lion cubs, the Panthera spelaea.
That's right, yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing, and I'm really hoping for a serious scientific publication of you know, their description and everything, because they are like frozen encyclopedias of cave lion biology.
Sure.
Yeah, that reminds me. There was a paper that was recently published regarding a cave painting in Patagonia, and the writer thought it might have belonged to Panthera atrox. I want to see your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I really was not convinced because the you know, on one hand, even with the best of you know, cave art or rock art, prehistoric art, you always have to wonder if the intention of the artist was to be 100% realistic. And then there are styles, art styles that really place this or that piece of art in the less realistic part. So just that painting, I would hesitate before taking it for a say a realistic illustration of any kind of extinct cat. So I think that in terms of the appearance of Panthera atrox, we will still have to wait for something more, you know, more conclusive.
Yeah, I also believe that the paper writer, he also used, because there is a large Pantherian in that area, but it's debated whether it's I think it's Mesembrina or
yes,
or it's atrox. So what do you possibly think?
Well, I'm very confused by that because you know, back in the days when Alan and I did the big cats, it was generally believed that the lions, or so-called lions of the species Panthera atrox, had entered South America, and so especially the sample from that Peruvian tar pit site, just can't remember the name right. Talara. That's Talara fossil site. It was considered a a prime example of Panthera atrox in South America. But now this Canadian paleontologist called Seymour has re-studied that material and come to the conclusion that it's actually a big jaguar.
Yeah.
And so whenever you come to analyze what features of the skull, essentially the skull, paleontologists use to determine if even if Panthera atrox is a giant jaguar, which has been seriously proposed a few years ago, then you get the impression that we need to do some more, some more studies to really get a clear, fixed list of anatomical features that tell apart a lion from a jaguar from something that is entirely different. So at this point, I think that the panorama of South American big pantherins is a bit confusing. I wouldn't dare say anything, very, very strict about them.
Yeah, I definitely agree because, like as you said, the morphology of all the pantherians is so similar. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and it gets more confusing when you step into the Pleistocene, because at least for modern lions and tigers, there's like a couple of features that seem to work. Like lions, for instance, have bigger infraorbital holes in front of the orbits, and the shape of their nasals, as seen from above, the outline of the suture of the nasal is different. So with those two features, you can tell a modern lion from a modern tiger skull. But when you go to the Pleistocene in North America, you see skulls that combine small infraorbital holes with say lion-like nasals. So what's the meaning of that mixture? It's really very confusing.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm gonna pass the mic over to Greg or Michael. So whoever wants to talk. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll take over for a little bit here. I was looking to see. I was curious about your various collaborations with various museums and networks, television networks. If you could tell us some of your stories working with such organizations as the BBC, National Geographic, the Discovery Channel, and so forth.
Yeah. Yes. I think that in general, when you have been used to work with institutional clients like museums, you get used to be in a very strict scientific environment, and then when you go to work with more commercial clients, then it's very different, because it looks like spectacularity becomes the priority, and you as a paleoartist, you have to press to keep things accurate, because sometimes you feel like your client doesn't really care very much about accuracy, especially if it goes against spectacularity. One interesting case was working for Discovery Channel a few years back on a documentary they were doing about the tiny hominins from Flores Island, the so-called hobbits. And so the producers wanted to create some epic battles between hordes of hominids and giant Komodo dragons. And it really was an interesting exchange of views, when I was always trying to keep things a bit more quiet. Like, sorry, but this was not Megalania. This was just a rather big Komodo dragon, but it wasn't 10 meters long. And also, I had to remind them of the biology of these animals, which are not, jumping on top of a hominid like a tiger would do. But So it was a very interesting process, and in the end, we reached a compromise. So the final piece is probably more dramatic than I would have it, but a bit more moderate than they had in mind.
That sounds very similar to how dinosaurs have been used in documentaries and so forth. Some of the paleontologists I've interviewed in the past have mentioned their displeasure with certain programs for misrepresenting them or misrepresenting the facts, or doing speculative things that really aren't really all that well supported by, like, say, the evidence, for example. And it sounds like what you were describing here, almost, in regards to the full Homo floresiensis going to war with Komodo dragons.
yeah, and when you are used to work with paleontologists, you share their fascination for the facts. So it's strange when you go to talk with a film producer, and they will tell you that they want something based on the fossils, but cooler. And my reaction is always the same. What can be cooler than the real thing? I mean, our views of dinosaurs and hominids will change with time. But for me, nothing is cooler than show it as we know it. But with the media, there's always that edge to making things bigger, scarier, faster, and sometimes bloodier.
Yeah, Jurassic Park, for instance.
Oh yeah. But anyway, I think that any of us who has the age to have been, an adult when the first Jurassic Park film opened, well, I can't forget that. I was as really as shocked as Dr. Grant when that first brachiosaur appears in the screen, and I thought they did it, because that was like a quantum leap in the possibilities of reconstruction. And I think we still have to see another leap like that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I was just a small lad when I first saw Jurassic Park back in 1993. I don't remember a whole lot, but when the first dinosaur appeared on screen, my jaw probably just dropped. Like so many other people my age, born in the late 80s, growing up seeing the Jurassic Park films of the 90s.
Yeah. Those were the days.
There's a word for people that like to have their prehistoric animals, be like movie monsters, teeth snarling, roaring, just fighting, blood and gore, guts like that. That's the term for that is awesome, bro.
Yeah, and then, for me, with this passion I always had for fossil mammals, so it's been like always I have been comparing these, this kind of very dramatic images, which are a sort of epic fantasy. I think it's for many of us, the distant past is a never-ending epic fantasy. But then I was always, confronting that with documentary films, with BBC films, where they try to show you a lot of hunting and fighting, but still you get a view of the casual, even the monotony of the daily life of wild animals. And then when I had the chance to go to Africa and see the big cats in the wild, then I developed that other view of how wonderful would it be also to travel to the Pleistocene and just see a group of Smilodon dozing off. Well, that's what they do for most of the time, and that's real. Okay, I would of course hope for them to do something exciting as well, but yeah, daily life is exciting as well.
And that's been a trend with recent paleoart I have been keeping track of over the past 8 years. So ever since that book All Yesterdays came out, there has been an overall trend in paleoart to shy away from depictions of the prehistoric past as, violent and savage, and just depicted as it was. The dinosaurs and mammals of the past weren't that different from animals we see alive today. Cats, prehistoric cats, they wouldn't have really been that much different from their modern counterparts in terms of their behavior and the habits. A big American lion, he'd probably be dozing off in the sun for half the day, just like his modern cousins at the zoo or in Botswana would do.
Yeah, and also when you see wildlife books, it's an interesting exercise, because many of the photos, the very good photos that you see of big cats, is not so much about them doing something very violent, but it's a combination of a kind of picture that is well composed, and that it shows the animal in a different light, and that the way that the composition blends the animal into its environment. I think these are all there are many kinds of input that can make you grow as a paleoartist, and to escape that narrow view of dragons and monsters eating each other.
And I would say your art, for the most part, has done very well in doing a balance of showing the animals, predatory activities, along with them just doing regular things like sleeping or patrolling their territory, or even doing more intimate things.
Yeah, and that's also the challenge for the future, because especially when you think about doing a new book, and it's like say a white canvas, where you feel tempted to repeat the old stereotypes, but you think to yourself, it's an opportunity to explore all these other all these other sides of the biology of extinct animals. So that gets very much enriched by the observations of modern animals, because you create a mental tapestry of a lot of things that the animals can do, and that you can show in your paintings.
I know the BBC was really criticized for the way they showed behavior of both dinosaurs and prehistoric mammals, not so much the way they made them look. But
yeah.
You, Mauricio, have a blog that is just fantastic. Greg, remind me, it's called Chasing Saber-tooth, I believe. And you show from pencil to paint how you did some of your beautiful paintings, and you give some pretty interesting advice on composition, how you change that around. And then also you speak of drama too, which you've already spoke about today too, but not making them too dramatic and bloody and that kind of thing. Can you speak on that a little bit? Yeah.
Going back for a moment to that BBC, to those BBC series, working with dinosaurs, working with beasts. I remember being involved in the reconstruction of Smilodon from South America, and it was an uncomfortable situation, because, as often is the case with those big series which hire a big number of advisors, by the time they call you, they have made most of the important decisions. So the 3D model of a Smilodon was already finished, and it was rigged. So all of the inaccuracies that I saw in it were not. It wasn't possible to correct them. So all I could do was to make some suggestions as for the aesthetics of the animation. So there is a scene where those saber-tooths are seen chasing some macrauchinias, some of those South American native ungulates,
Yes.
and I tried to suggest them to use some of the subtleties that you see in modern big cats. For instance, when they are chasing their prey and turning their head to the side, like to check the velocity of its prey as they approach from behind and from a side, because their idea would normally be just a head-on chase and impact. And that was one part of the film that I still watch with some pride, because at least in that they took my advice. So it was like trying to be more aesthetic and not only dramatic. So that's exactly what I try with, with variable results, because you are always learning in this business, and sometimes when I do these blog posts explaining all the process, as you mentioned, from pencil sketch to final painting, sometimes it's like an unpleasant exercise, because I get to see the things I did wrong, maybe in a painting that I did only a few years ago. When I get ready to share it with my blog readers, then I come across some things that I'm not so proud of. So I try to share them too, so that people will get a better idea of the lights and and shadows of this job.
It's a fantastic blog, because I can see the gears turning in your head as you decide, let's put this tree here. No, not there. And you take it away completely. It is really good. All artists should check out that blog. Yeah.
I think it's important not to try to show your own past and your own process as a perfect narrative. And this blog has proved a very useful exercise, because as I prepare the posts, I revisit my past and I see my past mistakes. So that's a good way to keep learning.
Right. There's a paleoartist that we don't hear too much from anymore, but Brian Franczak. Now, Brian would never sell any of his paintings. He kept them all, and when things would change, either in his mind or with what paleontology had found out since he did the painting originally, he would go back and accurize it. It's a hard word to say. Repaint it.
Yeah, and can you imagine how far worse it gets when you are in the digital era, because you can modify your digital art forever. So even with published art, for me it's sometimes like a moral duplicity. What to do? Because if this is the published version, then I shouldn't mess around with it anymore. But I'm very tempted to modify things, because I often think of the old masters of classical music, and when you hear a symphony by Beethoven or Brahms, what you are hearing usually is the last version, which is quite different from what people heard in the first playing of the symphony back in the 19th century.
Is that right?
When the composer was in his 70s, he rearranged the whole thing, he reorchestrated, and I find it wonderful, because these people were improving their skills and retouching their work. But with visual arts, it's usually more difficult to do that, and you have to coexist with the evidence of your old errors.
Yeah, like you kind of say, it can almost drive you crazy, changing things back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not just scientifically accurate animals, but I mean, should this tree be here? That kind of thing.
Yeah. And then there is the scientific accuracy,
well, sure.
which of course is it's not only the fact that new fossils are being discovered all the time, but new study methods are being developed. So if somebody now studies the genes or the DNA in a Neanderthal bone, and they come to the conclusion that that Neanderthal had blue eyes and red hair, then your painting of that creature gets outdated in instantly.
Right. And then you speak of drama too, like you don't want to have too much bloody animals and everything, I guess, huh?
Yeah, which is also like a conflict with myself, because
Yes.
I have to say that sort of bloodthirsty, moviegoer and consumer of B movies is very, very well alive within me. So I also have a soft spot for blood and violence. So then I have to say to myself, okay, but not too much. Keep the balance.
Right. Yeah. You're in both worlds. Sometimes you got the paleontologist looking over your shoulder saying, and other times you've got the more book movie type people that want you to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's it's a kind of thing that makes you feel guilty. I would talk about the guilty pleasures of wildlife observation, when you are very happy to see the beauty of the animals, but when something very dramatic happens in front of you, there's an adrenaline rush that really compares to nothing else. And it was actually yesterday. I was in Gibraltar, in the southernmost part of the Iberian Peninsula,
Sure.
working on a project on Neanderthals. But we also took a chance to watch the migration of the raptors that come from Africa in the spring. They return to Europe, and they arrive right in front of the same caves where the Neanderthals used to live. These are very tall cliffs, and you see these vultures and eagles who are really exhausted after crossing the sea. And but there are the seagulls and even some falcons that make their nests in those cliffs, and they attack the raptors as they arrive. So there was this huge vulture, like 2 meters wide, and it just couldn't cope with the attacks of the gulls, and it fell into the sea. And it was like like a pteranodon. It was something huge, trying to recover, but it was hopeless. And so we watched the poor thing die in front of us. We called the rescue boat. They didn't arrive in time, and these kind of experiences they hurt you, but at the same time they teach you something deep about what it means to be alive, what the danger of death means, So I think there is something healthy. There is something deep about this fascination with violence. So we still need to to find the balance. But I think it's not only that like a fascination for violence, like something vulgar. I think there is something deep in it.
I mean, especially with cats, especially our relationship with the big cats. I mean, historically, big cats were some of the most feared predators of man throughout all of our history, even stepping back, to our earliest ancestors in Africa. And indeed, there's actually some fossil evidence of predation on hominids by prehistoric, saber-tooth type animals like Dinophilus, for example. This brings me to an interesting question. If you had the opportunity to travel back to any, per-event modern history to document, like say, dramatic man-eaters, which ones would you like to go back and observe, doing this sort of thing? If it was me, even though it would be very dangerous, I'd like to go back in time to late 1890s, Tsavo, Kenya, to observe the dreaded man-eaters of Tsavo.
Yes, but you don't have to go that far back, or well, if you go to India. I was in India a couple of months ago, and people there have made such an incredible effort to save the tiger. There are different opinions about how to do this, but the fact is a success story. They still have tigers in India, in a country with a billion inhabitants, and the tigers kill people. Every year there is a toll of deaths, and that is because these kind of predators, they are so superior to us in individual strength. It's very different from hyenas or wolves. People are afraid of wolves, which in statistical terms is stupid. And a wolf pack can easily dismember a healthy human, but they don't. And I think it has to do with the fact that individually, one wolf is nothing without its pack. And for hyenas, it is similar. If you are walking around in the African savannah and you are surrounded by hyenas, you have nothing to fear. If you are still able to walk normally, there's nothing to fear. But if you cross with a lion, that's a different story. And lions still kill people. So it's very humbling, and it is really like a test for our for our commitment to coexist with the wilderness. If we are able to admit that there are predators around that can and will kill us.
In California, we completely eliminated wolves. Only recently, if some cameras set up in the forest found out that they're finally coming back, and everyone's pretty happy about that, except for farmers that have chickens and stuff. But then we also have mountain lions too that kill people, but we are trying to protect them as well. So, like you say, it's kind of a double-edged sword there.
Yeah, we have to strike for a balance. But I think there's really no other way. I mean, because we know that we need to preserve complete ecosystems, so that even for the quality of the air, the water, everything, and those complete ecosystems include the predators. So. There are ways to coexist, and when I saw those Salinger paintings all those many years ago, the fascination of seeing that Rancho La Brea landscape with the dire wolves coming in the distance and some giant vultures flying overhead, it was not just like a drawing of an extinct animal. It was a time portal. It was like a window into a past that was wild, and that takes me to the fact that we still have wilderness, and so I'm very much in favor of rewilding projects and such things, because it's something like a compensation for the inertia of destroying wilderness, which is of course also going to happen.
I mean, I'm just, when man-eaters attack in modern age, it just brings me back to hundreds of thousands of years ago, the Ice Age. Stories like that probably were a lot more common back in the time when those cats didn't exactly have much reason to fear humans. Do you think that Cro-Magnons and Neanderthal had to deal with the same types of man-eating cats that we did nowadays? I also can understand that the European Ice Age cave hyenas were actually quite a serious threat to both Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal, respectfully. Hyenas, and they actually can be quite deadly. I mean, with their bite strength, it wouldn't be take much for them to tear a human to pieces if they felt like it.
Well, you know that the hyenas have the strongest bite of certainly among living African carnivores, and the cave hyena was just like a race of the spot hyena. That was what was the traditional lore. I think there are some authors now that claim that it's actually something different, but at any rate, in the late Pleistocene in Europe, both the Neanderthals and the Cro-Magnons, they would have faced a similar panorama to what modern hunters-gatherers face in historical Africa. So the real danger were always the big cats, because they can take you at any situation. You are just walking back to your cave, and you suddenly get that impression that you are being stalked. And that is something that happens to you in Africa when you go from your tent to the toilet. You hear like a noise in the vegetation, and suddenly your heart is racing, because you don't see the cat coming to you until it's too late. So that would be like, in terms of danger, the most important factor. But then, in practical terms, what the big cats were for the Neanderthal and the modern human economy were probably providers of carrion, because they were so much better than us at killing ungulates. So that's one possible reason for the rarefaction and extinction of big cats in Europe. We were competing for the same resource, ungulate meat, and a big cat could kill you or me at any time, but a band of strong Neanderthals, 6 of them, that was a serious thing. And then imagine 20 or 30. They could drive any big cat from their horse or bison or even mammoth prey.
Yeah, indeed. The cat would be like the assassin, and the hyenas would be like an army of sorts if they were out in full force.
Yeah, but I tell you, when you're out in the African savannah, if you are a healthy adult, even a pack of 30 hyenas is not a danger for you. It's a bit mysterious, because they could perfectly dismember you, but they don't. And probably there are some behavioral, details that we don't know and we may never know. But the fact is, I don't know if you know this about this small village in Ethiopia, where the natives have the habit of feeding the hyenas, the spot hyenas. And so at some point in the night, somebody goes out to the skirts of town with the bones of animals, like the trash from the butchery, and the hyenas come, and people feed them with the hand, and it is really impressive to see the size of a single spot hyena as it comes towards a sitting man who is handling the hyena with, say, the femur of a cow or anything. There is no attack. There is no violence.
But yeah, cats, they get all the rap for, manning and but okay, I think we should get back to the paleontology. I have some good questions here from fellow artist Jeremy Hurst here. He has a question for you. He wants to know what is your opinion on the possible theory that Eusmilus might not be a valid genus?
Might not be a what, sorry?
A non-valid genus for Eusmilus.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think the genus will always be valid because I think it was created for a European fossil. I think it was created for a French fossil. So I think that the real question is if the American fossils that have been named Eusmilus belong in that genus. And that's a very good question because, for one thing, the European Eusmilus, which are the ones for which the name was coined, are rather smallish named rabbits. But American things like Eusmilus sicarius, these are big things. And so my opinion would be that there is some amount of convergence, because both European Eusmilus and American Eusmilus, even being different in size, they share extreme saber-tooth specializations. So my guess would be that with more fossils and more studies, we may discover that they actually converge on that morphology. But I think there are fossils around which have not been studied, and so we would need a student making a serious PhD thesis on the subject.
So I suppose that means Eusmilus is still a legitimate species and genus.
Yeah, well, there are several species, and as you know, I was talking about the most spectacular and familiar American Eusmilus, like Sicarius, but there are also diminutive Eusmilus species, which are more similar to the European counterparts. And so there is a diversity. So maybe the genus will still be used for some American fossils, are not for others. I think that it's a very necessary revision that has to be done on that.
Mauricio, before you were talking about Eusmilus, I think, don't you invite people to go with you to Botswana and in Africa on your trips?
Yes, we have been doing this drawing the big cats trip to northern Botswana since 2013, and so it is an opportunity to share with visitors this experience of watching the big cats in their environment and trying to understand their anatomy, their action. So from day to day, we we spend a while back at camp, talking about anatomy. I show them, I make drawings, I explain them not only the structure of the big cats, but also how to draw them. And then next day, if we are lucky and we see the leopard or the lion, we come with with an additional depth with more insight. And even for me, it's always like invigorating experience to have a wild leopard or lion in front of you and almost seeing the bones and the muscles inside. It's people are always delighted, are not just being content with seeing and taking a snapshot of one of the big five, but really having a sort of X-ray vision and having a more deep experience. And then I have made a couple of workshops here in Spain, but I really don't do much of that because it's a temptation to do more sharing than creating, and the balance is difficult. So if I spend more time preparing workshops and things, I will be doing less original work than I like to. So you have to do sacrifice. And,
that Africa trip sounds like a trip of a lifetime. I asked my wife last night if we could go, and she said no.
Well, sometimes we think of Africa as a dangerous destination, and it makes a very deep impression. But I have never felt that I'm more in danger in the African savannah than crossing a street in Madrid or New York. So
yeah, especially New York.
Well, and Madrid.
Okay, I'll take your word on that. Well, if any of our listeners would be interested in going, how should they find out details?
Oh, well, it's you can. The best thing is to contact me through my Facebook page. Use the Facebook chat to get in touch with me directly. So I'm happy to answer to anyone and share the details of this trip. We are doing it this August, but now it's rather late to join. But for next year, everyone is welcome to consider joining.
Okay, great.
Speaking of those big cat tours, is there any place that you would like to take a group on tour to that you haven't gone to yet?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
The question was on the cat, on if there's any place that you would like to take a tour to, but you just haven't had the opportunity or means to do so.
Well, yes, I just discovered India earlier this year, and I'm overwhelmed. So my tours have been the tours I have guided have been always to Africa, and I needed to see a true forest cat because I have been so many times to Africa. I always tend to project an African image on any fossil site. But last year I was very busy making reconstructions of the Miocene environments around Batallones fossil site, this saber-tooth cat site that I was talking to you earlier about. And there is evidence that this fossil site had thick forest cover, at least in some sections, And so it was very important for me to see how a big cat behaves and moves around in forest. And really seeing the Bengal tiger in an old forest of giant trees, which is something like a cathedral. And then you have this bright orange animal with those stripes in front of you, and then it disappears from sight in a second. It's it's really something I would gladly share with people in the future. But of course, there is also this all these details about organizing a trip that is not enough to wish for it. For these Botswana trips, I have a friend who is a local tour operator and makes all the arrangements for me. I couldn't possibly do it. I don't have a clue about organizing these things. So I just go and share my passion about the big cats, and I don't have to care about anything else.
If I ever could go on safari, the one place in India I would love to go to the most would be the Gir forest in Gujarat to see the last remaining wild population of Asiatic lions.
Yeah, I couldn't go there. I went to central India, to Madhya Pradesh, where they have these incredible national parks, Kanha and Bandhavgarh. And that's pretty spectacular. It's actually the kind of environment which served Rudyard Kipling as an inspiration for the Jungle Book. But I think it's very, very interesting to think about the implications of the Gir forest lion population, because we tend to think that lions choose the more dry, open environments in India, and tigers would be more confined to more humid, forested areas. But all evidence was lost with the historical extinction of the lion everywhere except Gir. But how would these two big cats share the subcontinent back in the 10th century? That would be an interesting rewilding experiment to create wildlife corridors in India so that the two big cats could meet again and see how they managed to avoid each other, how they managed to share the landscape, because in historical times both of them were widespread in India. So it's that kind of experiment that can only happen if we manage to preserve the wilderness, and India is doing a great job of that.
That gives me some interesting thought experiments. Even hundreds of thousands of years ago, cave lions must have, in some points, intersected with prehistoric subspecies of tigers. It'd be interesting to see what kind of interactions those groups of Panthera might have quite possibly have had. And they could have possibly served as a mirror of sorts of how the Asiatic lions and the various tiger subspecies in the past might have interacted with one another, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a very it fosters humility to think about these interactions, because in principle you would think that the lion, thanks to its social structure, is invincible. And for instance, it was Alan Turner's and my own theory, and still is, that the lion in Europe was largely responsible for the rarefaction of the saber-toothed cat Homotherium, because the lions were bigger and they were social. So what can face that? It's like a force of nature. But then you look at modern India, and you see that the tiger has stood its ground very well. where I was in central India, it is rather green forests. But if you go further west, halfway between there and the Gir forest, you have the famous reserve of Ranthambore, which is a much drier area. What would happen if a pride of lions enters Ranthambore today? Would they have an advantage over the tiger? I think there's a lot that we don't know, and then we only make inferences based on our limited observations.
This also leads me to think about Ice Age North America. Panthera atrox, the largest of the cat species in North America, coexisting with Smilodon fatalis throughout much of its range, and even in some parts coexisting with the scimitar cat, Homotherium. What those kind of interactions might have been. Were lions of North America living in prides just like the lions of Africa, or were they more like tigers, being perhaps solitary or maybe hunting in small groups or pairs? That's just also just as interesting to contemplate.
Yeah, and we need absolutely any scrap of evidence to try to reconstruct that, because at this point any explanation is possible. If you review the scientific publications, almost every year there are at least one new paper stating that Smilodon was social, and another new paper stating that it was solitary. And well, if you think that the lion is social and the tiger is solitary, and if you find fossils of both of them, you would be so hard pressed to tell them apart, then there is no point in trying to say that Saber-tooth were social or Smilodon were social. Okay, maybe Smilodon fatalis was social and Smilodon populator was solitary. Maybe even some populations were more social than others. So we would need some any kind of new evidence to guide us, because if Panthera atrox was social, any other carnivore in North America would have to submit to it. Remember measuring some Panthera atrox long bones at the American Museum of Natural History and trying to fit them with my tables of modern lion measurements, and they were so far beyond anything. In some of these male lions from Rancho La Brea were 1.3 meters tall at the shoulders, like a donkey, like a small horse. So that's really amazing to think what a pride of these animals could do.
Yeah, about the only animal that could reasonably stand up to a group of lions would probably be the short-faced bear at most.
Yeah, but again, it's if Panthera atrox were social, then it was probably one bear against 10 lions. That's no contest. But certainly 1-to-1, 1-to-1. I wonder what could stand in front of a short-faced bear. That was a true monster.
And for that, we can take a look at tigers today. Tigers and bears have quite an interesting relationship with one another. In India, sloth bears are oftentimes taken by Bengal tigers of various sizes, but most often this is oftentimes by surprise. And in the Russian Far East, brown bears have been said to make up like a 1% of the diet of Amur tigers up there. And bears have also been known to occasionally steal kills from tigers or follow them to their kill sites, or sometimes even kill them out of territorial disputes, or even in rare cases predation.
Yeah, of course. If a carnivore is having enough meat in its diet, and that is very variable among bears, then other predators will consider it competition. And among large carnivores, the way to deal with competition is to kill. They may eat or they may not eat the other carnivore, but if they can, they kill the competition. And 1-to-1, if you compare a tiger with a sloth bear, there is no contest. The tiger is bigger and more powerful, but the bears are known to stand their ground very powerfully. And I think there is a YouTube video these days about a fight between a sloth bear and a tiger, and that's really impressive. How this bear really stands its ground. So certainly, if you imagine a short-faced bear, individually there's nothing to stand in front of it.
Mauricio, did you hear about the sloth footprint they found recently?
Oh yeah.
Where was that?
In America, I'm pretty sure, but sorry, I'm not 100% sure where it was. But anyway, the point of it was that a human was putting his feet in each of the sloth's footprints, following.
Oh, really?
And
No, I didn't hear about that.
Oh, yeah, look, I'm sure it's online if you look it up. But just Google it. But they say that there were signs that the sloth had been turning around and swatting at the human that was following him, and some combat was going on.
Well, I love that kind of stories.
Oh yeah, those trace fossils can tell you so much, actually.
Yeah. You know, back in the 90s, there was a fossil discovery here in Spain of a fossil track site of Miocene age. It was early Miocene, so it was at the time of some of the earliest true cats. And miraculously, this fossil site had preserved every detail of the foot pad anatomy of these creatures that were walking, along the shore of a prehistoric lake. And then we have this amazing grouping of cats, like 3 or 4 cats walking side by side together, and there is no obstacle, nothing to in that flat mud plain to condition their walking. So they were just walking together. These were lynx-sized fillets. So we made that conservative conclusion that it could be a mother with 3 grown cubs.
Oh.
Because in that way we don't have to, to get into trouble making hypotheses about social cats back in the early Miocene.
Yes.
And then in India, in this trip, we were crossing a meadow, a prairie, and then we find 5 tigers. And I think, well, isn't the tiger supposed to be a solitary species? And you see 5 adult-sized tigers crossing the grassland, and one of them is very nervous. And the nervous one is the mother. And the others, they can look big, but they are just grown cubs. And the mother is anxious because if she comes across an adult male that is not the father of the cubs, they can get killed. So she was literally herding cats, roaring and making every effort to keep these 4 indisciplined cats to walk where she wanted them to walk.
Yeah.
So it's truly amazing.
Well, speaking of grouping of cats, what I wanted to ask you earlier was about the Badiona's fossil site, and exhibits. You painted some amazingly beautiful paintings for the museum for that site. But why do you think it was all carnivores in this site? And this is near Madrid, correct?
Yes, Batallones fossil site. These are obviously natural traps, because they were not exactly caves, because it's not the kind of bedrock where true caves can form. It's something called tunneling. And so there were a series of cavities, and it is apparent that the carnivores could get in, but they couldn't get out because of the shape of the cavity walls. Maybe there was some slippery mud in the walls. So now and then you would have a rhino or a horse falling into the holes. Maybe there was water. Well, in fact, there is evidence that there was standing water in the bottom of these cavities. We have fish fossils. So the carnivores were confident that they could jump in and out, but they couldn't. So over a period of maybe months, maybe years, many cats would enter the holes, probably hoping to scavenge, and they just died there. So now we have like 98% carnivore fossils in these cavities.
Yeah, one of your paintings is as a big cat on top of a tortoise, and a bear kind of lurking behind him, and the cat's all muddy. It's a great painting. Yeah,
it's because when you are digging in those sites, it's a little bit like watching that vulture drone in front of us. You are extracting the skull of a young saber-toothed cat, and you see this was a cub, still had milk teeth, and it just couldn't get out from here. It probably entered following its mother. And what kind of drama was happening here? And then you have the huge carapace of tortoises there, 2 meters long. So it would be a spectacular, but also a very sad sight to have been there. And I try to reflect that. I don't know if you noticed, but I even put some flies to give an idea of how terrible the smell would be.
Yeah. How do you think the saber-tooths use their teeth? Because what really interested me was that a lot of the skulls found had the main teeth broken, or at least one of them. Should we be drawing our saber-tooths with one broken tooth?
Yes, that's a very interesting evidence. We don't have the numbers here that you have in Rancho La Brea, but still we have dozens of skulls, and for the big saber-toothed cat, Macarodus afanistus, there is clearly a lot of broken canines, broken in life. So these animals were breaking their killing weapons with disquieting frequency. And my personal impression is that they were not very accurate. They were not terribly efficient as compared to Smilodon, but they were good enough to be the most efficient predators around in the late Miocene. So what you see is that it's like a Frankenstein in evolutionary terms, this saber-tooth from Batallones, because it has a primitive skull, a primitive atlas, the first cervical vertebra, and it is a combination of the atlas and the skull that allows late saber-toothed cats like Smilodon to kill with such surgical precision. But Machairodus didn't have that. So it had very flat, very fearsome upper canines, but of course fragile because they were so blade-like. And probably the whole skeletal muscular system of levers didn't allow it to kill with such precision. Or maybe there was also something about the behavior that it was, less careful. But whatever the reason, it looks like these animals got kicked in the face. They were biting the horse, and it wasn't well enough immobilized. And the result was a lot of broken canines, and still they survived.
Obviously, they're not like sharks where those will grow back, right?
Yeah. It's some of them had a lot of wear. So you would say that if this animal had the right saber complete, then it probably spent several years learning to kill its prey with only one saber, but the other tooth is very smooth. The stump of the tooth.
Oh yeah.
And but then you find some that have there are some skulls that you have to see to believe it, that they have the two sabers broken, and then on top they have a broken mandible, and it was like this animal was, and you see that there is an infection in the area of the fracture of the mandible. So there is a whole range of life stories that they will have to be told someday.
I wonder if an animal like that was being fed by the other animals in the pride or whatever,
Those are very good questions. As you probably know, many of the specialists that propose that Smilodon fatalis from Rancho La Brea was a social cat are using this kind of evidence of injured animals that couldn't possibly feed themselves, and so they have to rely on the group kills to keep going. But in Batallones, the kind of injuries that were so bad, in general, you don't see that they had a lot of time to heal. So it's different. So maybe it's a solitary cat can go along with only one saber, but once the mandible is broken, you only have days. It's a matter of just starving to death or dehydrating, and that's it. So the kind of evidence we have of trauma is not at a pair with Rancho La Brea in terms of disabling trauma. But what you have is many broken teeth, many broken sabers, I mean.
Yes, right. I once heard Robert Bacher talking about a site, I think it was Megalosaurus dinosaurs, that he said were a family and were helping the sick and the wounded other dinosaurs by feeding them. So it was happening even millions of years before these cats. So who knows? They might have been doing
it. Yes, absolutely. But the problem with cats, as far as we know, is that they are very aggressive in general, and they are not the most collaborative of carnivores. So in lion society, you have yes, wounded lioness can rely on the possibility of eating from the kills of the pride, but I would say that it's more a case of being tolerated than being helped.
Yeah, I like that.
So if you look at the fossil record, we have among hominins, in this fossil site in Georgia, in Eastern Europe, called Dmanisi, which is very interesting because you have a very good hominin fossils, a very good saber-toothed cat fossils, including the skull of a hominid with the saber punctures
Right.
of a saber-toothed cat. And then in that site, you have the skull of an old hominin who had lost all his teeth and had lost them a long time before he died.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, it's not just a matter of him being tolerated around. He had to be fed because the other tribe members would have to chew the food for this old person. So there you have a clear example of group members helping another one. But much as I love the cats, I think that cat society is something more of a rough environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, here I think I'll let Aditya talk for a little bit. And he also has a picture in the chat here of something that would be of interest to anyone that will be seeing this in the video format. It shows looks like a saber-toothed cat about to plunge its sabers right into the back of a hominid's skull.
Yes, that is from Anton's blog regarding Dmanisi and the Paranthropus, I believe, and the Megantherian, I think. I think those are the species, anyways.
Yes, it's Dmanisi, but the hominin is, depending on who you ask, it would be Homo georgicus or Homo erectus. And but there is another example in South Africa where there is a Paranthropus skull with puncture marks, but the puncture marks are not from a saber-tooth; they are from a leopard.
Oh yeah,
so we have like examples of both types of cats making short work of our ancestors.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy that such like big felines would have coexisted with our ancestors. Like, imagine the amount of fright one of them, like, if you'd encounter such a large feline.
Yeah, they were everywhere before us, in a way. I mean, when we came to Eurasia from Africa, when our ancestors migrated, each wave of hominid migrations was accompanied or preceded by big cat migrations. So we were never far. They were our companions all through our evolutionary history.
Yeah. But I had a question regarding Smilodon. So did you hear about that recent paper that Smilodon fatalis was found all the way down in Uruguay?
All the way down in where?
Uruguay. Yeah.
No. You are giving me a few surprises in this interview.
Yeah, there was some Smilodon fatalis remains found down there. So I found it kind of funny that two Smilodon species may have actually been in close proximity to each other.
Yes. But it's the same thing that we talked about with the lions and the tigers. Probably, if you had a fossil site in north central India, which accumulated, in a river bed during several centuries or thousands of years, it's very likely that you would find the bones of the tiger and the lion together. That can mean many things. That can mean that the river is dragging the bones of the animals from, say, the tiger from a more forested area, and then the lion from a more grassy area. Or maybe the climate has shifted over a few thousand years, so the area was grassland at first and forest then, but you don't really have the resolution in the fossil record to tell those fast changes in the environment. And you get the impression that the two big cats are there side by side. So, but at any rate, if you look at smaller cats, like today's serval and caracal, for instance, these animals have almost the same body weight, and if you look at their skulls and their dentitions, they have very similar adaptations. They are eating rodents and birds, and they are living side by side in many areas of Africa. And they avoid each other by hunting more in the day, and the other species hunts more in the night. One of them is more terrestrial, the other is more adept at climbing trees. And according to orthodox ecological theory, they couldn't be there together. And still they are.
Yeah, so they might have been, like Smilodon fatalis might have been, I don't know, nocturnal, while Populator was diurnal. That could have been a possibility.
Or the other way around. Yeah. I mean, it's there can be many ways that two similar species find a way of coexisting. It's the same with the jaguar and the cougar or puma in several parts of Central and South America. They share the resources in many subtle ways. It's the time of day. It's the kind of prey, but it's still it challenges the classical theory about exclusion. So they managed to do it.
Yeah, that leads me on to my other question. What do you envision the exact mechanics to be for Smilodon taking down various prey in both North and South America? Because Populator had toxodonts and macrochenia, while Fatalis had bison, camel. So how exactly do you believe Smilodon would have hunted, and how they might have differed between different prey items?
Yes, well, the thing that first strikes you when you look at the fossils of Smilodon populator is how robust those limb bones are. They are so short that I think there's one paleontologist who said that in Smilodon populator the tibia, the shin bone is almost shorter than the canine. I mean, if you consider the canine root and crown, but so these short, thick bones with huge muscle insertions are telling you that this animal could individually be in control of very large prey. So for this animal, the paws and the forelimbs were as important as the canines in terms of hunting, in terms of killing its prey, because it would bring them down and keep them immobilized with those huge claws. I mean, I have dissected a male tiger, and holding the paw, the forepaw in my hands, I was amazed at how big it is. It can demolish you. It can demolish an adult person without much effort. But the paws of Smilodon populator were much wider,
Yeah.
and much more powerful.
Yeah,
So a Toxodon, it was doomed. I mean, this saber-tooth was very serious. But Smilodon fatalis was something intermediate between that monster and the more conventional Megantherion. So it was heavier than a modern lion, but still it was, I think, more maneuverable than its South American crossing. So you look at the structure of the foot bones, for instance, the heel bone, the calcaneum, and you see that this animal was not so bad at jumping. So if we assume it was solitary, it would have to be a very patient stalker. But once a prey like a horse or a bison was within a few meters of it, it could run pretty fast. So I would envision a tiger-like kind of attack, trying to get as close as possible to prey, then get to its prey within a few bounds, sort of bounding gallop, and then holding it to the ground with the powerful forelimbs and delivering a surgical precision bite. But then, if you think about proboscideans as potential prey, then I think you need a group action. I don't really see even a cat as powerful as a Smilodon doing all the complex work that you need in order to bring down a mammoth or a mastodon, which is also being defended by a herd. So it's not only a matter of brute force, but also strategy. So I can't imagine Smilodon killing a medium-sized proboscidean individually.
And in regards to ground sloths, because or in general more armored prey, like there was a finding in lower Texas or something, I believe, with a Glyptotherium, a glyptodont, that had bite marks on its skull, and people were thinking that it was Smilodon that did the damage. So yeah, I think it matched the teeth of Smilodon gracilis or something like that. Yeah, it goes against the intuitive theory, because it is biting on bone, which is the thing that any wise saber-tooth would try to avoid at all costs. But I think when you find evidence that is right in front of you, you have to accept it. So there can be many explanations. It could be an individual behavior, because some animals learn to tackle with difficult prey. It's like lions that are very good at killing porcupines, and some individuals are very expert at doing it. They develop their own technique.
and many others don't know how to do it, and they die out of the infection of the quills embedded in their muscle and in their paws. So I don't know, but I think that the evidence is solid. So there was a saber-tooth that did that foolish, apparently foolish thing of
Yeah.
Maybe it was young and inexperienced.
Well, it's the kind of things that you only judge in retrospect, because if it managed to kill the glyptodon and then it turned it around and feasted on its flesh for a week, then it was wise.
Yes.
But if it broke its teeth and it died a few weeks afterwards, then it was foolish. But we don't know that. But certainly, I think that the skull didn't have any. It didn't have the canine embedded in it, so apparently the animal didn't break its teeth.
Yeah, that could also be attributed to the glyptodon was a younger one, I believe.
Yeah.
It may have been a softer, surface compared to an adult.
Yeah, of course. And then you have these other examples of saber-tooths of different species biting very inconveniently on the skulls and on the I think there is an example on the shoulder blade of other saber-tooth or other carnivores. And then you have a different factor, which is aggression. I mean, which is a fight against a competitor. And in that scenario, the behavior is different because it's less careful, and it makes sense because a prey only wants to escape, but a rival wants to kill you, just like you want to kill that rival. So in those situations, you have examples of saber-tooth biting hard and deep into the bones of other carnivores.
Yeah, I believe there was also one found of a dire wolf that had faced the rage of a saber-tooth.
Exactly. Yeah. Again, it reminds you of those documentaries of modern lions making battle with hyenas and killing them just, as you would say, to give an example, to make an example, and having no interest at all in eating the hyena. Is just part of a war. And with the dire wolves, it would be the same.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to bring up, there's apparently a 2,000-year difference between the extinction of Smilodon fatalis and the Smilodon populator. Smilodon fatalis apparently died out around 13,000 years ago, whereas it was 19,000 years ago in Brazil for Smilodon populator. So what do you think is the probable cause for that?
Well, I don't have the data, but I think in both cases, the key for the extinction has to be the availability of prey, which is probably mediated by the presence of human hunters, but also with whatever environmental changes are affecting their prey base. So I don't have the data, but I would bet that if you look at the timing of the extinctions of the most abundant ungulates, you will find a correlation with the extinction of. One of them is causing the other. There are all those theories now about the trophic cascades and how the predators control and affect the populations of ungulates. And of course, there is truth in that. But ultimately, when a carnivore, a big predator, goes extinct, it surely has to do with the availability of resources, of its prey. So I would think that if you look carefully enough, that has to be the key. That there has to be a differential extinction of the main prey base between North and South America.
Yeah, that's what I think too, because I believe that Smilodon populator may have been one of the more top carnivores in South America, whereas Fatalis was lower on the totem pole for carnivores.
Yeah, but that would depend also, because if Panthera atrox were a solitary cat like a tiger, and Smilodon fatalis was a group predator, that's one of the hypotheses that are contending there. Then Smilodon fatalis would be the top predator, because the balance among competing predators, especially in the more open or open woodlands, has much to do with numbers. For instance, if you have a pride of lions and a clan of hyenas competing around a kill, I think you need to have something like, several times, a particular number of times more hyenas than lions in order to get a balance. So each hyena is no match for a lion or even for a lioness, but if you have the numbers, then the hyena becomes the dominant predator in a given situation. So the same would apply for Smilodon. Even if a Smilodon was smaller than the American lion or the short-faced bear individually, if it were social, then the game, the rules of the game change.
Yeah, what I found pretty cool is that for in South America, there was a paper that was published in 2013 that talked about the different prey items that the predators would eat or feast on, and the one that was most paralleling Smilodon populator was a type of canid. I think it was Procyon. So I found it pretty interesting that a pack hunting dog would have maybe been in close competition with Smilodon.
Yes, absolutely. If you look at modern canids, sometimes the anatomy alone doesn't tell us enough about the relative power of that dog species as a competitor for other carnivores. And if you look, for instance, at the South American maned wolf, it's a pretty big canid, but also it's solitary and pretty shy. So it's really no competitor for a jaguar or a puma. It only kills birds and rodents and things. But then in India, you have the dhole, which is really not especially impressive canid. It's just a little bit bigger than a jackal, but it lives in very well structured groups, and it kills the same prey as the tiger does. And on occasion, it has been known to kill a tiger, but of course we are talking about a group of dogs. So individually, each dhole is really not at all impressive, but with a well-structured society, they become a very serious threat to even the biggest carnivores.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Another question I had, which has been pressing me for quite some time, is you see all this cave art of different big cats like cave lions and leopards, and you don't see many of Mecharodonts. Like, there was that sculpture, but we don't know for sure, I believe, that it was attributed to Homotherium. So why do you think there's such a loss of rock art related to like saber-toothed cats?
Well, I think that the ability and the inclination of some humans to make drawings or paintings or sculptures of animals and to do it in a realistic manner is not universal. So you don't only need that the saber-tooth live side by side with humans, but you needed to live side by side with artistically oriented, inclined humans. So I think that by the time the first Cro-Magnons entered Europe, the saber-tooths were almost gone. It's not a clear thing if Homotherium survived into the late Pleistocene in Europe, as suggested by one single find at the North Sea, or if they disappeared for some time and then a population entered back from North America. But whatever the case, it was not abundant. So maybe our ancestors just didn't, our artist ancestors didn't come across it. But you need only one clear representation to change the hypothesis completely. So if you remember when Chauvet Cave was discovered back in the 90s, it was a shock to see so many carnivores so very beautifully depicted, and it was also the oldest example of cave art in the area. So maybe tomorrow we may discover a new cave and have a couple of saber-tooths depicted in it. But for that figurine, I think that it's not at all clear that it was Homotherium. I cannot rule it out 100%, but it's not a clear representation of a saber-tooth. So
yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, one more thing. So there's a large amount of predators in the La Brea tar pits, and in comparison to that, there's also like during the Pleistocene, there was also a large number of predatory species in like the South American regions, like in the Pampas. So, what are your thoughts on the predator guilds present in like the areas and like how they contrast or compare with each other?
Yeah, it's very strange because in South America there are times in the Neogene when there are hardly any large mammalian predators worth mentioning, and there is a classic example of the substitution of one species that occupies the same niche with the South American marsupial saber-tooth, Thylacosmilus, which is replaced by the placental Smilodon. But as far as we know, by the time Smilodon arrived to South America, the marsupial saber-tooth was already extinct. And it was part of a very poor carnivore guild. And it sometimes looked like the giant terror birds, were actually doing much of the work. So South America is peculiar, and by the time you get a more impressive guild of larger carnivores, most of them are immigrants from the north or their modified descendants. So you think, okay, if these animals came from the north and they thrive because they have a lot of ungulates on which to prey, why did the native carnivore guild get so poor in the first place? And that's pretty enigmatic, and it looks like sometimes it is a matter of coincidence or contingency that one lineage simply, well, gets unfortunate. But the fact is that the neogene history of mammalian carnivores in South America is very strange. And I don't think that there are several explanations, but none of them has satisfied me this far as to why that should be that way.
Yeah, speaking of the peculiarity of South America, there's been recent suggestions that Macrauchenia may have lacked a trunk because it didn't have the necessary nasal bones to have a trunk, or at least a prehensile one. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I haven't seen that suggestion, but at any rate, it reminds me of some earlier suggestions as to the presence of very short or underdeveloped trunks in some fossil proboscideans, like, for example, the Dinotheres, the famous proboscideans with the downward curved tusks in the lower mandible. And so this specialist would point to the lack of some indications of muscle insertions that are clearly found in modern elephants, which are something like the standard for these kind of structures. But then there are other considerations that suggest that Dinotheres should have had long trunks. For one thing, their forelimbs were very rigid and column-like. So in order to drink with that short neck, the animal would need a long trunk. So one possibility is that we are not recognizing all the muscle insertion areas simply because the relevant muscles didn't leave a clear mark. But I will need to see the case in more detail. But for me, always Macrauchenia has been a classic example of bony nasal retraction, which very strongly suggests a trunk. So I would need to see very, very convincing evidence to think otherwise. So I will be glad to review whatever new evidence there is.
Oh yeah, I posted some links to that.
Okay, I'll check that then.
Yeah, it's a muscle reconstruction and then an external reconstruction of the proposed Macrauchenia, which the author, MidiaouDiallo, he said that it would be similar to Saiga antelope.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see. But anyway, Macrauchenia, I think that as far as I remember, is more extreme in its osteological modifications. But of course, we cannot, we have to kill our darlings. If new evidence appears, then we have to make up our minds, and always remember that there was a a hypothesis about sauropod dinosaurs having trunks because their nasal areas were retracted as well. And apparently nowadays nobody thinks that theory holds water. So, well, maybe we have to change our image of Macrauchenia.
Yeah.
I will check that.
All right. And then I had one more question. Why does the rib cage size of big cats or in carnivores in general vary so much?
The rib cage.
Yeah, I know it's a peculiar question.
Well, I'm not aware of a great variation. For one thing, in fossil sites, ribs are not the most usual or the most common find, but well, I'm not aware of a great variation. So that's another of the new things from this interview.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much most of the questions that I had. Thank you.
Yeah. That's very good to chat.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I'll start fielding some questions from Connor Dottie in Prehistoric Times here. I'll post them here in the chat and I'll read them off piece by piece. His first question is, between the two, which are more closely related to saber-toothed cats? Members of the subfamily Phylogenetic or Panthera?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Alright, Connor's first question was, between the two families of modern cats, Phylogenetic and Panthera, which ones would be more closely related to Marsupial or true saber-toothed cats?
I would say that both are equally distant, because the original split between the Macarodons and all the other conical tooth cat goes back to the early Miocene, and by the time the Feline and the Pantherines diverge from each other, by that time the saber-toothed cats already had a long separate history. So none of them is closer than the other to the saber-toothed cats. But in structural terms, some members of the Panthera lineage superficially resemble the Macarodons. And of course, it's the classical example of the clouded leopard, which has very long canine teeth, and some superficial similarities with primitive saber-tooths like Promenantherion. But this doesn't have to do with any phylogenetic proximity.
That would be a case of convergent evolution then.
Yes, and also of deceiving appearances, because some morphological similarity in terms of having a long, narrow brain case, a long maxilla. These are not really related to the biting style, to the kind of killing bite that one or the other type of cat uses. So they look superficially similar, but they were biting in very different ways.
And speaking of convergent evolution, there's also the story of the Australian marsupial carnivore Thylacoleo and the story of how it evolved. Would you like to maybe tell us a little more about how a marsupial carnivore evolved from herbivorous ancestors?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most striking examples of I would call Gouldian evolution. That Stephen Jay Gould was always happy to say that evolution works with the raw materials available. And in this case, the ancestors of the thylacoleonids were arboreal, specialized leaf eaters. So that there's hard to imagine a more unlikely stock to develop a hypercarnivore. So what these animals did was they used their almost koala-like limbs to develop some huge thumb claw, sort of dew claw for raking and for holding their prey. And then they turned their incisors, which are almost rodent-like, into a gripping device, and they turn their cheek teeth into a sort of super gigantic carnassial pair, carnassial blades that could process meat really with alarming speed. So it's I think that there are few comparable examples of turning one anatomical plan into its opposite.
Yeah, this thing is actually one of the more terrifying, marsupial predators to me. Some people have jokingly called this the real life drop bear.
Yeah.
In case for those who don't know, the drop bear is a creature from Australian folklore which attacks you from dropping out of trees.
Yeah, but then the final the latest species of the lineage, the Thylacoleo carnifex, it was a very heavy animal. So it's difficult to know to what degree the climbing adaptations in its limb skeleton were still functional, and to what degree they were just something that the animal had inherited, and it was using it for catching and holding prey. For instance, if you look at the skeleton of a lion and you compare it with a leopard, in principle, the lion should be as good a climber as the leopard. But if a male lion goes up a tree, it can be really a shameful spectacle. And it has to do almost exclusively with total body mass. So with Thylacoleo, I would hesitate before attributing it a very, proficient climbing skills. Maybe it did, maybe not.
Yeah, but one thing that definitely is clear is that this animal had a very thick, strong tail, and the vertebrae had chevrons on the underside where the tail would have contacted the ground, which would have helped to protect critical elements such as the nerves and the blood vessels if it used its tail to prop itself up on its hind legs, much like a modern kangaroo. And if this is true, this would free its forelimbs to tackle or slash at its intended prey.
Yeah. It's again, it's a combination of features about which it is very difficult to know which ones were actively used as part of a hunting strategy, and which ones were just part of the package. So it would be great to find good, for instance, fossil footprints, any circumstantial evidence of how the animal moved, maybe some smoking gun evidence of a chase, this kind of miraculous finds that one is, and especially we paleoartists, are always hoping for, and now and then they come out.
Well, in Thylacoleo's case, they have found trace fossils that indicate that they could actually climb rock faces and likely rear their young in caves to protect them from potential predators like Megalania or the terrestrial crocodile Quencana. This fossil site was located in Western Australia. Is in the paper Gavin Prideaux et al.
Well, that sounds really fascinating.
Yeah, these trace fossils included claw marks and bones from those caves in Western Australia.
Yeah. I've been hearing of findings over the last few years in Australian caves, but I often see more of press releases and media news than detailed scientific papers. So I get the impression that there is a lot of information there that should clarify much of the story of marsupial lions.
And the last thing I'd like to close out with regarding Thylacoleo is that for its size, this thing had the strongest bite of any known mammals living or extinct. And it's been reported that a 101 kilogram individual would have had a bite comparable to that of a 250 kilogram African lion. And they based this off, they used 3D modeling based on X-ray computer tomography scans. They showed they couldn't suffocate their prey, but instead, they used their incisors to stab and puncture the flesh of their prey, while the more specialized carnassials did a combination of crushing the windpipe, severing the spinal cord, and then lacerating the major blood vessels in the carotid artery and jugular vein. And this would have allowed to kill an animal the size of a Diprotodon in probably less than a minute. Talk about efficient to an extreme.
Yeah. Certainly, their killing equipment is so radically different from that of for our placental counterparts, the placental carnivores. That, as you may know, for many years there were serious proposals that Thylacoleo was actually vegetarian. So and you could read detailed papers with equations and calculations that show that this animal couldn't possibly really kill animals and eat meat. It was a little bit like those old calculations that show that a bumblebee couldn't possibly fly. but yeah, it's so obviously a predator and so obviously different than it had to kill in very different ways from the carnivores that we are familiar with. So all those things are of course the stuff for great paleoart.
So that's very. This overall, Thylacoleo is just one of those interesting oddities that came from the land down there, which people still joke as the place where everything can and will kill you if you're not careful.
Yeah, sounds a bit like Skull Island of King Kong fame.
Yeah. Mauricio, is there any evidence for stripes or spots on any prehistoric cats?
Sorry?
Is there any evidence on prehistoric extinct cats that they had tiger stripes or leopard spots, anything like that? Because I know you give them that.
Yeah, but not that
artistic license.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. I mean, we would need a miraculous preservation like in those Chinese Mesozoic fossil sites where you have the striped tail of a dinosaur or something. And for fossil cats, we still don't have that. And the only frozen ones are lions. So we haven't been lucky with that. So all my hypotheses about the coat patterns of extinct cats are derived from a mixture of phylogenetic considerations and functional considerations. And as far as functional considerations go, the only choice is marked versus plain. But were there stripes, were there spots, I usually consider that stripes like those of a tiger are like a more specific development of one modern species, and spots are much more widespread, not only among felines but also among their close relatives like the genets or even the spot hyenas.
Right.
So
even some horses have spots, and of course dogs have spots.
Yeah. So you just go. I normally am of the conservative school in terms of attributing patterns to extinct animals, which is a way to be likely right in what I say in statistical terms, but most likely wrong in particular terms, because if you had designed the patterns of modern cats with this philosophy, you would never have designed a lion with a black mane or a tiger with stripes.
Right.
So I'm very likely to be wrong in at least a good portion of my reconstructions, but they are just working hypotheses.
Sure. I just wanted to be sure there wasn't some proof of that, but I guess it's artistic license.
No. I wonder if maybe even if we don't find miraculously preserved fossil with the fur on it, maybe future scientists will develop a way to recognize a pattern in the DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe one day we can study the DNA of a Smilodon and see a particular gene that codes the Jaguar rosette or anything.
Sure.
But
we're
in
doing amazing
the
things with
meantime,
DNA. Yeah, that's possible, I would say.
yeah, let's cross our fingers.
Yes, definitely.
I wouldn't say it would be too impossible. I mean, with dinosaurs recently, they've actually had some incredible luck finding preserved melanosomes or pigment cells that have actually allowed them to determine with certainty what colors they may have had in life. So if we're lucky, we might find a cat fossil that has these same preserved pigment cells that would allow us to make a determination as to what color it might have had in life.
Yeah. But also there is something related to the taphonomy and to the kind of fossil sites where you would normally find a fossil cat, and usually they are not found in those Lagerstätten, exceptional conservation sites. We have several in the Age of Mammals record, but like Messel in Germany. But these fossil sites, as a rule, they don't have big carnivores. So the kind of fossil site where you have carnivores, the most you get is an articulated skeleton, and then you celebrate.
Yeah, that's as good as you're going to get. Anyhow, Connor Dottie had an interesting second question here. He wanted to know if you would be talking about evolutionary anachronism at any point in the near future.
Evolutionary
anachronism.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I've never. It's just a question. It's a topic that I'm not even sure I'm familiar with. Mike, if you know anything about evolutionary anachronism, you could take us away at this point.
Don't get me started on evolution inaccuracies, because while I certainly believe in evolution, I think that scientists still have a lot to learn about exactly how things change and how fast and what conditions, and everything. So I'm not sure what he's asking, but
all right, I guess we could skip.
And you asked one paleontologist a question, as I've said many times. The next paleontologist will give you a completely different answer.
Okay.
So. Yeah, and at any rate, when you work with fossil mammals, which are close relatives of animals that are alive today, there is like a factor of proportion, like some theoretical considerations don't even appear in your horizon, because you are working with events that happen at at a small scale, like the differences between a saber-tooth and a lion. In the larger scheme of evolution, they are just variations on a theme.
Mm-hmm. Mauricio, haven't I heard that throughout history, the Cenozoic, whatever, but saber-toothed cats kind of came and went, and then came again? You know, they
many times.
Yes, many times. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, that has to be for two reasons. One of them is that there is probably a set of mutations that are not very unlikely to happen in a mammal-like vertebrate. And the other reason for this, this series of repeat performances of the saber-tooth is that once these mutations come into play, the model that emerges is devastatingly efficient. So that's the reason for the frequent appearance of saber-tooth in the fossil record and their quick success. And then when you wonder why then they go extinct time and again, it's for the same reason, because this specialization, which makes them so efficient, also makes them very vulnerable to change. So whenever the availability of resources changes, saber-tooths are about the first to go, because they depend very heavily on a steady flow of biomass, of prey biomass.
I think you're saying what I was going to say, but don't you think the change might be their prey? That say they would need the larger canines when their prey was a larger animal, and then maybe as times changed, they started eating smaller animals, and it wasn't as necessary to have huge teeth, and then maybe it became necessary again later. You know?
Yes, but when you look at modern African ecosystems, you see different carnivores that have very different body sizes, very different adaptations. Like you go to Kruger National Park in South Africa and you see lions, hyenas, wild dogs, leopards. And so if you ask some paleontologists, they would attribute a different prey to each of these animals. But in real life, they are all mostly eating impala, which is a mid-sized antelope. So yeah. they are using their very different weaponry to essentially kill the same animal. Okay. And that's because it's the most available prey.
Yeah, and it's
so that doesn't mean that saber-tooth would join that club 100%, but I am sure that whenever there was a big range of carnivore species around a big carnivore guild, rich with many species, they would be sharing prey species to a large proportion. So I think that it is most important the fact that saber-tooth would probably eat much the same prey as lions or tigers or spot hyenas, but they would be not very flexible when it came to eating a smaller prey for part of the year. Like you have a migration, and for the whole dry season, you only have gazelle. Lions can cope with that, but probably saber-tooth couldn't, because with those teeth, they couldn't be biting the neck of a gazelle, because they would hit bone every time. well, it's something of a caricature, but I think that the key is that as a supreme specialist, you become less flexible.
Okay, what I meant by evolutionary anachronism was as follows. It's a concept in evolutionary biology that was named by Connie Barlow in her book The Ghosts of Evolution to refer to attributes of living species that are best explained as a result of having been favorably selected in the past due to coevolution with other biological species that have since become extinct. When that context is removed, said attributes appear to be here as unexplained amounts of energy investments on the part with the living organism with no apparent benefit extracted from them and can either be prejudicial to the continued reproduction of the surviving species.
Okay, yeah, I see. But
I thought inaccuracies. You said inaccurate. I see. I'm sorry. You mean like a coelacanth or something?
It's an animal that has traits that were necessary for coexistence with something that is no longer around today.
Okay.
Yeah, but at any rate, there was I think one nice skull of the saber-tooth Smilodon populator, which was found with the lower with the jaw, with the mandible slightly displaced laterally. Well, it was obviously a post-mortem distortion, so that the upper canine was between the two rami of the mandible.
Ouch.
And there was this interpretation, I think by Cope or one of the early masters of paleontology, saying that this was a clear example of an animal that was in a path towards its own destruction, because the upper canines had become so long that at some point, when the animal was opening its mouth very wide, it tried to close, and it would get the canine in between well, this is ludicrous. I mean, there are many controls during the evolution of a lineage that would certainly prevent that any animal with dangerous adaptations would take its genes to the next generation. These things don't happen. So any species that has established itself over the millennia has to be fit enough. There is no such thing as carrying a trend that will have each generation developing even longer teeth that are maladaptive. That's I think that's utter nonsense.
You sure he wasn't just kicked in the jaw? That seems kind of weird. They say that rats have to keep chewing or their teeth will grow too long into their head, But with a saber-tooth, he wouldn't want to keep grinding down on his teeth because he needs them to stay sharp. So that's very strange.
Yeah. Well, the marsupial saber-tooth had continuously growing canines, but certainly that wasn't the feature that led to its extinction. Was some change in the environment, but the animal was obviously perfectly adapted to use those teeth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll move on to a more simple question here. Connor's third question was, why do you think the Chilicotheres went extinct?
Chalicotheres?
Yeah, the Chilicotheres.
Well, that's a good question. I really don't have an idea. I suppose that most extinctions of specialized herbivores, it probably has to do with the disappearance of its of its particular niche, its particular environment, because certainly they were never too abundant. So it was like a specialized kind of herbivore. So I would say they, like many other species, they were just victims of environmental change.
Hey, Greg, it's 8 o'clock in Spain. Should we let Mauricio go pretty soon?
It's still broad daylight here. You know, we have
Is it really? Wow.
Summer saving daylight saving time.
Yes.
So it's still a bright afternoon here.
Okay. Yeah, Aditya might have to, cut it soon. Here, he might have class to go. So let's give him a farewell here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, we should say, Mauricio, that you sell your prints and art too from your internet site.
Yeah. But
you will promote yourself, so I'm going to promote you for you.
Thank you. That's very kind. At any rate, it's we have been experimenting with different platforms and things. Now we are again in the process of changing that. So I will announce it when originals are fully available again. But I'm always so busy with commissions and assignments that I keep piling up originals, and I'm not very good at organizing the selling.
Yeah, neither am I.
But it's something I definitely have to do at some point. I will welcome any help.
Well, if you lived closer, I'd come over, but.
Yeah. We have an ocean in between.
Yes, that's right. All right. Well, it was really great talking. Have we ever done an interview in prehistoric times? I don't think so. You'd remember because my interviews are crazy. Yeah, we'll have to do that soon. I'll email you.
I will be very happy to have that. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah. I think you made a joint interview with Alan Turner and me back. Back.
Well,
in
it's time to do it. It's time to do an update anyway.
Well, I'm available anytime.
I will contact you. Thank you.
Excellent.
Muchas gracias.
De nada. Un placer.
Okay, here. These are the last two. This is part 1 of 3 for the last set of questions from Connor from his first half. He has two. It's a two-parter about Andrewsarchus. He wants to know if you are aware of any new fossils of Andrewsarchus that give us a better idea of what it looks like, or if we only still have that one skull. And to follow up on this, what do you think Andrewsarchus looked most like?
Well, as far as I am aware, we still only have that skull. So I normally tend to envision this animal like a sort of something similar to the big creodonts, like vaguely dog-like, but with a disproportionately large head, and of course its closer relatives are in this group of quasi-ungulates. So maybe they even had hooves instead of claws. I think it's one of those animals that are more a source of frustration than anything else for the paleoartist, because I always have to invent everything behind the head.
Okay, that's very interesting. And we got some final set of questions from Connor. He wanted to know your views on de-extinction and Pleistocene rewilding.
Yes. Well, I think that as a whole, it is a very positive trend because it shows that we are finally giving value to the wilderness as an essential part of a working biosphere. So in that sense, I'm always in favor of rewilding. On the other hand, when you go down to the details, sometimes it's difficult to agree with things like setting elephants free in North America because they are, somehow comparable to what mammoths would be back in the Pleistocene. This could be very disruptive, and it could, begin a chain of reactions that could easily get out of control. So I think that the best strategy is to set lands as big as possible apart and just let nature follow its rules and work with native species in 90% of the cases. But in general, I really like the idea.
Yeah, that's my thoughts on it. It's if we could clone these extinct animals, though, and yeah, we couldn't just plop them back, right nowadays, because the environments which these Ice Age megafauna lived, it's completely different to what they would have been accustomed to.
Yeah, but again, you have the example of India, where in many of the national parks in central India, it is not feasible for practical terms to bring the elephant back, even though it's native. So much of the work that the elephants would be doing for the environment, it is actually performed by national park officials. So in this case, the important thing is to recognize that the elephants were doing something important. So even if we cannot have free wild elephants in this overpopulated region for now, while we wait for wildlife corridors to be established, well, we know what they were doing, and we do our best to mimic their impact.
That's pretty cool. Alright. This is a hypothetical question. If destruction over hunting caused by humans never happened, and this is assuming that the overkill hypothesis is true, which megafauna most likely could have survived to the present?
Wow. That's the $1 million question. Because, as you know, we are far from general agreement about the actual causes of the megafaunal extinctions. So, if we assume that human overkill is the main cause, and I tend to think that it was a very important cause, then, for instance, I think that the mammoths would still be around, because the mammoth steppe of the Arctic was probably maintained in part by the action of the mammoths, not only climatic oscillations. I mean, climatic oscillations would make this environment to fluctuate in terms of latitude, but the mammoths were keeping it too. So if we didn't kill so many mammoths, then we would probably still have a different kind of grasslands in the north, and then many of the other species, from horses to lions, would still be there.
So basically, in a nutshell, if the mammoths and mastodons hadn't died out, they would be able to keep the mammoth steppe maintained, and therefore all the other animals that lived there possibly could have also survived to this day.
Yeah, broadly, that would be my intuitive idea. Not that I have made an extensive research, but I have like an overwhelming impression that the role of the proboscideans in modifying the landscape is huge and has been huge for the whole age of mammals, at least rather from the whole Neogene, since proboscideans first left Africa in the early Miocene.
So, do you think that any of the Ice Age carnivores could have possibly, made it to this day, provided that they people didn't kill them and that their habitat didn't change too much?
Yeah. After all, if you consider that the saber-tooth disappeared from North America, together with the American lion, the dire wolf, I mean, it was like a very drastic reduction of the diversity, which must have been caused by a drastic reduction in the prey base. So the fact is that in Africa you still have lions. So there has been no global change in the ecosystems that prevents lions from surviving, given the modern prey base. So yes, I absolutely think that we would have the Ice Age carnivores around, including the saber-tooth.
It'd be interesting to see how they would be if they. Okay, I had an interesting question here regarding the jaguar. Jaguars were found considerably more widespread throughout the Pleistocene than they were now. And in many parts of the range, they coexisted with the likes of Smilodon and the American lion, and even the cougars. What kind of relationship would preparatory relationship would jaguars have had in relationship to these larger cats? South America, jaguar is top cat, cougar is at the bottom of the rung. But in North America, it was kind of different. In the eastern half of North America, jaguars are quite commonplace. And I believe that Panthera onca augusta, the American subspecies, was a tad larger. But assuming that it... sorry if I'm a little long-winded here. But in short, what kind of relationship could we have expected ancient jaguars to have with Panthera atrox and the larger species of saber-toothed cats?
Well, one thing to consider concerning the evolutionary history of the jaguar is that apparently over time they not only got smaller, but they also got shorter legged, so that earlier jaguars had long legs like lions have or like tigers have. So it would seem that during the evolution of the or the co-evolution of the big cat species in the Western Hemisphere, the jaguar got cornered in a way. So it had to reinvent itself, and maybe that's the origin of this very, very short-legged, very robust animal that probably had to carve a new niche for itself in the presence of so many big cats that would dominate the more open sections of the habitat. I would say that the jaguar became cornered into a more something more of a forest habitat. That's my general impression.
So by switching to the forested habitats and probably going after different prey, that would have helped it to avoid competition from the larger saber-tooths and lions.
Yes, something like that. Yeah.
That would make sense. The jaguar would essentially be like the leopard in this regard, in terms of its place on the pecking order in comparison to these larger predators.
Yes, yes, but on the other hand, the jaguar is already beyond some say particular body mass, where it can be a very agile climber, because the reason why the leopard manages to coexist so efficiently with the tiger in Asia and with the lion in Africa is that it can climb to the higher and thinner branches. But the jaguar is already massive, so even after its say shrinking process, it still is okay. It can climb, but probably it needs to avoid more actively the overlap with the other big cats, because it's not as easy as for the leopard, who can share its territory with lions, because it will always climb higher. In the jaguar probably had to just migrate to areas where the other cats were not comfortable.
And given jaguars live in areas where there's water, and much of North America, in the eastern half of the United States, was swampland and so forth, this would have given the jaguar a major advantage, because this is a cat that is well adapted to living and hunting in the water, and the other cats would have not been so fond of water. So that could have been a way it avoided competition from these other animals, was by sticking to more watery based habitats and hunting specialized prey that only it could kill, because it had that extremely powerful bite to penetrate armor.
Absolutely, and that would be again something characteristic of the modern version of the jaguar. Whilst the early Pleistocene jaguars with their longer limbs would be more in direct competition with the other big cats of the open areas.
And this actually reminds me of something. You had mentioned the Babylona's, trap site earlier on, but there's a similar carnivore trap in Indiana that I've come to be aware of when I visited the Indiana State Museum, where they found a den site that was used by jaguars to hide their kills from other predators. This is also a death trap of sorts for the local dire wolf population. In particular, there's a specimen at the museum of a male dire wolf that fell into the trap and broke its leg. It's on display there at that very museum down in Indianapolis.
Wow, that's dramatic. Yeah. No, I wasn't aware of that particular site, but cave or carnivore traps in general are so essential for our knowledge of the anatomy of fossil carnivores, because otherwise you only have partial fragmentary fossils, but with traps the whole animal is there, so it's very good.
Yeah, at this particular carnivore trap, the main thing that was found down there was peccary. Peccaries were extremely common throughout the Midwestern United States, all about throughout the Ice Age, and it's thought that they served as the primary food source for most of the carnivores in the area, ranging from cougars, jaguars, especially direwolf.
Yeah. It's the same kind of phenomenon I was talking about with the impala antelope in Africa. If there is a medium-sized herbivore that is very abundant, then many of the carnivore species will turn to it, even if it's not in their optimum size range. Okay, they just kill more of them.
Yep, just take advantage of an easy to kill, commonly abundant food source versus trying to take something down that's large, give you a lot of food, but has the potential of killing you if you're not careful.
Yeah. There are some old films of jaguar attempting to hunt peccary and having to turn around.
those tusks, they can do some damage too. And anyhow, this is my last question from Connor Dodd. You want to know, how exactly do nimbrivids look in comparison to modern felids?
How much what? Sorry?
It's about the appearance of nimbrivids, if they looked any similar to modern felids.
Well, for one thing, we still need to clarify their exact mode of locomotion, because the nimbrivids have several features in their foot skeleton that indicate plantigrady. But I don't think it is a closed subject at all. But there are indications that they could be plantigrade. So if that is the case, that would make a visible difference with modern cats, which are all digitigrade. So otherwise they generally have short limbs, but some modern cats have short limbs too, from Jaguar to Jaguarondi. So in that particular, they could be still very cat-like. And then, of course, we don't know about their coat patterns. And again, since they are supposed to be the sister group to all feliform carnivores today, with the Feliformia being the group that includes the felids, the hyenas, the genets. Then they could share some of their coat patterns, but still they are so distant from cats that you could have any kind of original coat color patterns. So I would say that in general structure they were clearly cat-like, but still we could have many surprises if we could see them alive. And again, I'm hoping for some student doing a serious PhD project about the locomotion and foot posture of Nim rabbits.
They are an interesting group of animals here. But my next question is something I've been wanting to ask someone like you for quite a long time. And it's a hypothesis on saber-toothed cats. My question is, what is your stance on the hypothesis that saber-toothed cats may have had larger jowls or lip coverings or some sort of covers over their sabers to protect them from damage? This idea is not exactly an old one, but it has come up more recently on blog posts like Dwayne Nash's blog, for example. I want to know, do you think there's good evidence for saber-toothed cats, Macarodonts, having extra long lips or having lips over their sabers, or do you think bare teeth, as it's commonly depicted, is the more accurate depiction?
Well, I would say there is a range of species, and there are extreme morphologies. So, for instance, in the case of Smilodon, if you consider that it hardly has any flange in its mandible that is worth naming, and the canines are so long, I think I don't really see any possibility of the canines of Smilodon being covered in life. Then there are a series of species that are technically saber-toothed, including, well, the metallurines we were talking about earlier, and some primitive species in which it is possible that you wouldn't see the canines protruding beyond the lips in life. The canines were short enough to be within the range of the length of the canine in say, the clouded leopard. So well. And then there are all the species in between. And I think that you have to consider many anatomical and adaptational aspects. And I think that one of the arguments for covering the canines has to do with the chemistry of the of the environment of the mouth within the lips, like the saliva providing the right pH. The right pH. What was I thinking about? And that's not a convincing argument for me, because your dentist will advise that you control the pH of your mouth because you eat too much sugar, and then your mouth gets an acidic environment. But for wild animals that eat meat, that's not really an issue. And you have to consider that enamel is a very, very hard material. So I think that the solution to these things is to be very attentive to detail and to go case by case. So I'm still in the process of gathering more evidence and rethinking the whole thing, and probably there will be different solutions for different kinds of saber-tooth. But certainly I don't see any strong evidence for a hanging upper lip that would cover the canines, and especially in animals like Smilodon.
So, in simple terms, no bulldog-style droopy lips, in other words.
Yeah, and for especially for also health reasons, because if you consider the dog breeds that have a very loose skin and which have been sometimes used as models for what a Smilodon could look like, you have to consider that this type of loose hanging skin has been artificially selected. So these animals really have health problems. The skin around their eyes tends to get irritated. They dehydrate. So your vet has to be very busy to keep one of those dogs in good condition over the years. So that's not something that a wild animal can afford. So I think there are several reasons why you don't have a hound or bulldog-like skin in any wild carnivore.
Actually, that absolutely does make sense, but I don't think it would be impossible for certain members of Homo thernae or other saber-toothed cats that had much shorter saber teeth for possibly having their lips possibly covered up in a similar manner as a modern tiger or lion does when their mouths are closed.
Yeah, but that's a different kind of mechanism. I mean, it's not that the upper lip is hanging so low that it will cover the canines. So as I say, it's something that needs some detailed investigation, and well, we shall see. We shall see. As you say, some animals like Homotherium, there is more than one possible way to reconstruct them. So I think it's a good again an interesting subject for a PhD thesis. But in the meantime, well, I'm trying to gather more data.
Now, this is a fun one just thought of. Do you think that Gorgonopsids might have had lip coverings for their saber teeth?
Well, that's a different matter, because for these animals, even the kind of skin covering apart from the lips is open to discussion. They were not mammals, and while some therapsids were much closer to mammals, things like Cynognathus, but the Gorgonopsians were quite removed from our direct ancestors. So in the past, I have generally seen them as a rather reptilian design, and I still have to see definite, clear evidence to give them more loose lips. But again, it's I think it's an open question.
Well, another question just came about Gorgonopsids. What sort of integument do you think that Gorgonopsids may have had on their bodies?
What kind of what? Sorry.
Integument on their bodies.
Oh, yeah. Well, again, when I reviewed this subject some years ago, I came to the conclusion that unlike other therapsids, they would have rather naked skins, and I haven't seen any clear evidence to the contrary as yet. And I don't think they are comparable to the more advanced mammal-like therapsids. So I don't see them with say a hair covering or anything from the evidence I reviewed.
That would go to make sense. Okay, here's my fourth question. It's about commission work. When were you first tasked with doing the artwork for a book of any sort, and how did it go about from start to finish?
Well, for one thing, sorry. No. Well, the only book that I did as a commission work was the one that was published in North America as the National Geographic Prehistoric Mammals. So that was essentially the packager's idea, which Alan and myself gave flesh to. So that was a commission with a deadline. We were given a year and a half or something like that to complete the text and the illustrations. All the other books were our own initiative, which we proposed to different university presses, and we were on a royalty, which has worked sometimes better, sometimes worse, and is working ever worse because the book market is deteriorating very rapidly with digital technologies.
Yeah, this leads me to my fifth question. Is I wanted to learn if what you could tell us about your work with the late Professor Alan Turner on the 3 books you did together: Big Cats, Fossil Relatives, Evolving Eden, and a little more detail on National Geographic's Prehistoric Mammals. And then following up from this, your involvement with the book Dogs, Their Fossil Relatives in Evolutionary History, written by the late Dr. Richard H. Teffer and Dr. Xiaoming Wang. And final part, of all the aforementioned books, which one's subject matter captivated you the most?
Well, that both Alan Turner and Dick Tedford were like some of my most important mentors when I was beginning with my paleoart work. So with Alan, it was important that we both lived in Europe, so it was easier to get together now and then to coordinate our collaborations. And so whenever we finished a book, we were already making plans for the next. So for 20 years, we were collaborating non-stop, and sometimes books developed from research papers that we were doing together. So it was a continued collaboration and also a great friendship. And Dick Tedford, I saw him less because, well, it's not so easy to travel to the States from here. But since my first visits to the American Museum, we started to talk about something, a work about dog evolution. And by the time we were finally able to do that, the health of Dick Tedford was not so good. So our mutual friend Xiaoming took more and more the responsibility of finishing the book, and it was a great collaboration too. And I discovered many things during the process of researching the dog book, and in that way it was like more of a discovery journey, because the cats had been my main subject for many years. So it was like a more of a slow process.
So, are there any other stories you could share with us regarding Professor Turner as to what he was like as a person, for those who may not have been that familiar with his work or his research?
Yeah, Alan was the main expert on the evolution of old world, well, especially European and African cats during his his active career, which was very long, in the 80s, 90s, and in the 90s, and in the first decade of this century. He was curator of the South African of the Museum of Pretoria in South Africa, and he was like a person with many cultural interests. And one thing he especially liked was flamenco music. So he took any opportunity to come to Spain so he could enjoy some good flamenco guitar and dance. And so that also helped, because he would take any opportunity to come to Spain to visit. And also I think that a very important thing that defined Alan Turner was his sense of humor. He was very ironic, and he always had a joke for every situation.
So I would have loved to have had that guy on the show if I had this back in 2012.
Yeah. That was, it was terribly sad for all of us who knew him. And but well, he's one of these persons who had such a deep influence on everybody around that in a way he is very much alive today, because there are many of us who remember him very, very clearly, and who were very strongly influenced by him.
And do you have any similar stories regarding Richard Tedford?
Well, that I think everybody who knew Dick will agree that he was quite the gentleman. He was such a pleasant person to be with, he always had a smile, and he was very inviting for me as a young aspiring paleoartist to open the collections of the American Museum for me. And to this day, I think that those collections are the most important sample of saber-tooth fossils in the world. So whenever I could manage to go to New York, I knew that Dick will be there waiting with open arms. So yeah, he was very, very helpful. And the last time I saw him, it was in China, which is a country which he visited very often because he had many important projects, paleontological projects going on there. And well, he was, I think he was already in his 80s, and as young of spirit as ever. And after that, he died shortly. So, but this last memory is of him in his prime.
It's probably best that you remember him when he was at his best.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Speaking of books, how did you get the idea to write and illustrate your own book on the evolution and evolutionary morphology of saber-tooths?
Well, that was like the original idea of the Big Cats book, the one that Alan and I did all those years ago. But we ended up doing something wider because saber-tooth looked like a very restricted subject matter. So well, it was fun because we also did all the other cats, but I always had like the that frustration of not having dealt in enough depth with the saber-tooth, and especially the non-filled saber-tooth. So this idea was in my mind for many years, and in a way, when Alan passed away, it was like I felt, well, now I have to do it on my own. And so I sort of sped up with the project, and I got in touch with Indiana University Press, which were very helpful from the start. And importantly, they agreed to publish it in full color, which wasn't the case of any of my previous University Press books. So I jumped at the opportunity.
Speaking of your paleo art, I have done research on it. So it's mentioned that your work has been featured in many scientific publications and journals and so forth. But for this question, I'll start with a simple one. How many museums in the world have your paleo art on display for the public to see? And if so, can you name off these museums in question?
How many museums, sorry?
Museums actually have your art on display for the public to see.
Oh, I really couldn't say because, I worked for many museums over the years, and some of the exhibitions have been redesigned several times since I did the artwork originally. So I know that my art is permanently on display in of course in Madrid, in Sabadell, I think in Washington DC, in Florida, Natural History Museum, in Namibia, now in Tanzania, in the national museums, but there are many smaller museums where I have simply lost track of what happened to the artwork I did for them, if it's still on exhibit, or it's just too many years working for many clients.
As for me, personally, I've only ever seen the art of 3 paleoartists, and, well, actually make that 4 in person. At the Field Museum in Chicago, I got to see the acclaimed Charles Knight's work in person, which was almost like a religious experience for me, seeing the artwork of a man that I've read about so much, but to see it actually in person, I just had a special feeling when I first saw the iconic Knight murals that he painted for the Field way back in the early 20th century. In Indianapolis, Karen Carr's exceptional paleo art is a sight to behold. And I've gotten to see the artwork of several other paleo artists in person at Cleveland's Dino Fest, from Julius Chittany, Mark Schultz, and most recently Danielle Defoe from the Royal Ontario Museum.
Yeah. In the case of my own art, mostly it has been reproductions that are exhibit. There are pretty few museums who have my originals in display, and largely because after 2004, I mostly abandoned oil painting. So I went digital. But even before that, many museums would prefer to print my work from digital files. So I think that in North America, maybe the only museum to have my original oil paintings is the Florida Museum of Natural History. Anywhere else, it is just prints of my work that are on exhibit.
And in Dinosaur, it's mentioned that you've created artwork for a whole variety of exhibits around the world, including the Florida Museum, and even also including exhibits for the American Museum of Natural History in New York.
Sorry?
Didn't you also do art for the traveling exhibit from the AMNH Extreme Mammals?
Yes, of course. Yeah. And that was fully in the digital era. So those works were actually created in the computer, and I lost track of how many museums that exhibit went to, but I only saw the original exhibition at the American Museum, which was quite impressive. And that was a very exciting project to work in. I especially remember doing the greatest saber-tooth herbivore, which is the this North American Eocene herbivores like Eubasileus and I can't remember the name right now. What's the name of this creature? Yeah. It has 6 horns in its head and very prominent saber teeth.
Oh, I think I know. You went to Therium?
Yes, that's it. And so there was a helpful employee of the American Museum who made photographs of the fossil from every possible angle and sent them to me to make it easier for me to create the reconstruction.
Now, I have a question that actually has me personally interested, because this was of a new species. I've seen that you were also commissioned to do a reconstruction of a new species of giant otter from Yunnan Province, China, late Miocene. The species is Siamogale. I was curious as to how you got approached to do this reconstruction.
Well, since my early visits to the American Museum, I got an excellent collaboration with Xiaoming Wang, who was then making his PhD thesis. Then he was employed by the Los Angeles Museum of Natural History. And so there has been a series of collaborations about Chinese faunas and carnivores especially. So Xiaoming and his collaborators often get in touch with me for reconstructions of new carnivores that they are studying. So that was a very interesting project because they had 3D reconstruction of the skull of that otter created from CT scans of the original fossils. And so I was sent the digital files for me to work with in my computer, which allowed me to create an accurate, three-dimensional reconstruction of the head of the animal. Of course, when you see the 2D painting, it's you don't get you don't necessarily suspect how much information there is behind it, which is a part that is like it remains more private. It's part of the collaboration work with the scientists.
This otter has a special interest to me because one of the authors of that paper is Dr. Denise Su from the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, which is located in my home state, and I'm a proud member of that museum. So this is kind of why I brought it up, because one of the people that was on the paper works at this museum.
Well, it's a small world, isn't it?
Why, certainly, yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay, it's almost 9 o'clock here, and now I do have a couple of things to do. So if you have any last questions or something, I'm afraid I will have to be a bit brief now.
Okay, just a few simple ones. Do you have any tips and advice for anybody that wants to get into paleo art?
Yes, I think the two main tips are first to get a good training in traditional art, and to devote endless hours to drawing from life. I think that's something that will give you the tools to really turn scientific hypotheses into believable images. And the other thing is to collaborate and work intimately with paleontologists. You can even become a paleontologist yourself, but at any rate, the least you can do is to be open to learn everything that the paleontologists want to share with you about all the scientific aspects of the animal you want to reconstruct. So you have to be an artist, and you have to keep an open scientific mind.
Yeah, and like I said, just listen to your peers that are more experienced than you in artwork, because that can also go a long way to making you a better artist.
Yeah, and also I think that paying a special attention to modern animals is a way to make sure that your reconstructions will be lifelike, that they have breath and flesh, because given the fascination that we feel for the past, it is easy to dwell too much in fantasy. So our work has to be, of course, a balance between art and science, but it also has to be a balance between fantasy and reality.
And my final question is, how important do you think is paleoart in the promotion of science education?
Well, I think it's vital. I mean, if it weren't for the work of paleoartists, the ordinary citizen would ignore the existence of the paleontological heritage. I think it's as simple as that, because the scientific descriptions of fossils, well, they are like the key to understanding the past, but the key to educating and to making that knowledge available to the citizens, to the general public, is the art. So I think just as paleoart would be impossible without paleontology, I think that modern paleontology would not exist without paleoart, because museums and other educational venues are very much integral part of paleontology.
And for the last part is, what do you think is the future of paleoart in terms of new things in terms of technique or new depictions, or just the future of paleoart as a whole going into the 21st century?
Yeah, well, I think that there is now there is a gap between what can be achieved in terms of digital animation and what is actually achieved, because say that scientific films, documentary films, never can access the kind of budget that you need in order to do a full-fledged reconstruction and animation. So one of the things that needs to happen is that the full possibilities of digital reconstruction are achieved, and that means more resources and more money for scientific film. And in terms of say static art, painting, sculpture, I think the future is, I see it as a continuity of what we have now. It's just a matter of refining techniques, especially digital technique, but commanding traditional techniques, and incorporating more and more of the scientific information that is always evolving. So I don't see an end to paleoart, because paleontology is a science that will always have something new to say, and it will always be necessary to turn this new knowledge into images. So there should be a bright future for paleoart, at least in theory.
I actually would definitely have to agree with you on that. And I think this is a very good place to close off today's broadcast.
Okay.
Alrighty, it was an honor to have you on the program today, Mauricio Anton. Thank you very much for being part of the show today.
It's been my pleasure. Absolutely.
And
so, how will you? Will there be a link which I can share at some point to have to have access to this interview? Maybe share in my social media or anything?
Yes, I will absolutely provide a link once I get this converted into a video and upload it onto my YouTube channel, and then I'll happily share it. I'll send it to you first, then I'll spread it around in my various groups and social media sites and so forth. And speaking of which, where can people follow you on the internet, Mauricio?
Well, I'm mostly active on Facebook, and then I try to maintain the blog more or less updated, but sometimes it's difficult. And then I occasionally tweet, but not very often. So then I have my web site, but that's pretty static at present. I have to update it, but keep procrastinating.
And you also have a YouTube channel that people can also subscribe to watch your photos.
Oh yes, that's true. Of course. Yeah, I try to upload some videos now and then. Yeah.
I am already subscribed, and I'll include links to all your social media platforms, and your blog post, your YouTube channel, including links to buy the books that you have co-written and or illustrated.
Excellent. That's very much appreciated.
Yep. And as a further token of my gratitude, I'll also extend an invitation to be part of the Facebook group that is for the podcast, Prehistory Traveler's Guide. I'll send you a link to join after we get done recording.
Okay, excellent. Yep, please do that.
Yep, sure thing. Okay, and with that note, this has been Prehistory: A Traveler's Guide. I am your host, Greg Nettleman, signing off.